I'm privileged actually to come after Zoltan and Sam and Matthew, who described a whole range of issues and policy areas that I think we could go down and further elaborate on. But as described earlier about reluctant Remainers and reluctant Leavers, or moderate, I should say, Leavers and Remainers, I'm a massive Leaver and I'm a massive optimist when it comes to the UK's relationship with the European Union and indeed beyond, outside the EU itself. And I just want to mention in my speech a few opportunities that I think the UK can have going forward outside the European Union, but also the opportunities for countries and people around the world, especially in Australia, as we take on the opportunity of remaking our trade policy outside the EU, one of the first times we've had this opportunity over a generation. But first, before I get onto that, I just want to illustrate that for the UK, the European Union and our partnership with EU nations has been about principally economics. The UK entered into the then called EEC in the 1970s on the back of an economic common market. We were looking to engage on a tariff-free basis with European nations. Now, unfortunately, that hasn't developed in a particular way that I think, and I believe, hasn't suited the United Kingdom's role and indeed presence in the wider world. And again, our inabilities to take hold of the opportunities that have developed through the wider world because of EU policy, I think has restricted the UK's ability to operate and freely and take back control in a way that it should have control over its laws and regulations. And so the UK has always traditionally seen the EU and the wider world in a very different way as other nations see the European Union project itself. But I just also want to say here, developing on the theme, that the UK's relationship with the EU hasn't always been positive. And going forward, I hope that will be continuing, changing, I suppose. It should change to adopt to the new realities and engage with the European Union on a different playing field. And I think since the EU referendum, there's been a number of positives that come out of this. Theresa May, the new Prime Minister, albeit backing Remain in the campaign, has adopted an approach that is very outward-looking, at least in principle, and the understanding of reframing the UK's relationship with the European Union and beyond, I think, is definitely on the cards. And it's also definitely on the cards with regards to the general election. We are now in a snap election in the United Kingdom. Hopefully, the policy of a clean Brexit will remain post the election result. Of course, that could all change depending on who gets in. But current feelings and current polls indicate that there's going to be a Conservative majority that will be able to implement what was decided last year in the referendum. But the relationship with the EU, I suppose, will change off the back of this. If the UK gives the government a key mandate to engage with the European Union and the negotiation process in a way that gives it strength and confidence in Westminster, then I think the UK can have a better deal with the EU going forward without the costs that have been estimated to be over 11% of our GDP per year by economists, very free market economists like Patrick Minford and Tim Condon. The point is, though, I suppose, going forward with this, the EU has a very different perspective. The European Union wants to, of course, create stability amongst its memberships and its economy and grow in a way that, unfortunately, it hasn't been able to do over the past few years, but adapt to the new reality that allows it to continue its trading relationship with the UK without any particular costs. Unfortunately, this has come to mean the negotiation position that the EU has laid down has particular drawbacks from the UK's perspective. And this is a challenge the UK will need to overcome, and I hope if there is a clean Brexit mandate during the general election, the UK will be able to engage with the European Union in a much stronger, with much stronger will and much stronger terms, because the European Union currently is looking to restrict the UK's ability outside the European Union, if there is a trade deal, to benefit from its competitive advantages, to genuinely repeal legislation that could engage and reform its trading relationship, not just domestically, but with the rest of the world. And if that happens, then it's almost like a Cameron Mark II. Theresa May has come back with a deal that would really hamper the UK going forward and not allow for the UK to take the opportunities that are out there. Opportunities most notably with regard to trade. And so it's on the EU to soften its position towards the UK, because otherwise there may be the WTO model, which I don't believe we should fear, but again, the UK's desire is to engage with the European Union and indeed peoples around the EU in a different way going forward, and that has to be positive. I think what we saw from Zoltan's presentation is that the countries can throw off the shackles of nations like the USSR, former USSR. But of course, it's about reframing the laws and reframing society from then on. The UK has taken back control, or is in the process of doing so. It's now up to us to reframe the positions for the UK going forward and build a freer society, which I think has hitherto not been able to be achieved. And this, I think, needs a clear roadmap. And again, Matthew is kind to note the roadmap that Ian Murray and I co-authored, not just last year in its second edition, but previously with the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. And basically, I just want to go on to the roadmap and look at the trading opportunities with the wider world, because the opportunities outside the EU, if we leave the single market, if we leave the customs union, means that we can engage with Australia in a hugely positive and beneficial way. And that's because, of course, we're starting from a position of strength. Common language, common law, common understanding, and indeed an engagement to the fifth, we are, as it stands, the UK is the fifth largest two-way relationship trading. I mean, Australia is the fifth largest trader with the UK currently. And indeed, Australia sees the UK as its largest EU trading partner, currently, of course, EU trading partner. But there are huge areas, there are areas within the relationship, economic relationship, that can develop. I note there's huge exports from Australia of gold, but there's also exports of alcohol. The UK consumes a lot of alcohol, and indeed, 1 in 5 bottles of wine consumed in the UK is currently from Australia. This, I hope, will continue. I hope the trend will increase. But it's not just about gold or alcohol. It's about a trading style that I think Matthew touched on earlier, that we could thoroughly develop and go beyond what's currently discussed in terms of trade relationships in trade deals, and reform an understanding globally of what free trade can actually be. Because importing bottles of wine is positive, but also being able to sell in services on a mutually beneficial but competitive relationship, I think will also benefit the UK and Australia going forward. Of course, as developing nations around the world, like India and China, continue on the road to service sectors and what have you, the UK and Australia have unique abilities to sell into that market, and an ability to do so in a trading framework that will allow engaging with these countries, I think would be hugely beneficial, not just to the UK, Australia, but also the developing nations themselves. So I leave you with one thought in the sense of where this goes next. I think the UK has a positive role with reframing its relationship with the European Union. I think the EU needs to change its stance currently when it comes to that negotiation. But I think in terms of the potential of leaving the EU and engaging in the wider world, the positives for the UK outweigh the negatives. The UK, I believe, can be this new world of a Singapore-style global outlook country with a positive story to tell, and to engage with countries around the world, like Australia, to build on the alliances we have, not just economic but elsewhere, I think will be hugely beneficial, not just for the bilateral engagement of the UK and Australia and our citizens, but also, beyond that, set the train of thought, as Matthew noted, for future trade deals and future relationships with countries beyond that. So let's make the positives out of this. Let's take the opportunities. Let's repeal, in a way, domestically in the UK to suit where our economy needs it and suit the future direction of our economic foundations, but also to enhance our relationship worldwide. And I hope that will mean a quick, speedy, and beneficial trade deal with Australia, New Zealand, and everyone else. Thank you.